Hi there, and welcome to Israel Explained. Will there ever be a hostage deal? And am I going to make every episode about this topic edition? So, I think, and so does everyone else involved, that we have a unique opportunity to reach a deal. There's a few things working in favor of a deal right now that we didn't really have in the past. We have a framework from which everyone is working. The framework that Netanyahu's government approved in May, that Biden's government presented the next month, and then got the Security Council to approve. What was smart about that is it got everyone coalesced around the same framework. And that has saved a lot of time and a lot of effort. Meanwhile, Hamas has become a lot more ready to make a deal than it has in the recent past. The IDF has put a lot of pressure on it with relentless, very successful raids that have destroyed a lot more of its military capability. Israel holds Philadelphia, which makes it difficult for Hamas to get in anything that they need, including weapons. The entire international community is behind the framework. So if Hamas says no, they get blamed. And because Hamas has generally been perceived as the actor stopping a deal from coming through, international opinion hasn't soured on Israel, at least not as quickly as it was before. So Hamas, due to all these reasons, that there's also pressure from the negotiators, from Qatar and from Egypt. So for all these reasons, Hamas is more willing to make a deal than it was before. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Biden said, for his own political reasons, we know he's having some trouble now, that both sides agreed to a framework. That makes it sound like both sides have agreed to a deal, but that's not true. Both sides are working from the framework, but there's a lot of disagreements that remain. Here are the ones that I'm aware of. One, Israel's insisting on keeping the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas is insisting that Israel leave. That could be overcome with censors, an international force, PA observers who are not named as PA observers, some kind of obstacle underground. There's a lot of things that they're talking about in that regard. That seems like something that could actually be resolved. Then there's Israel's insistence that it be allowed to renew the war. That also seems like it might be resolved. Israel will get the ability to say that it's going to renew the war. Meanwhile, Hamas is looking for guarantees that the war will not be renewed from other actors. That way, both sides can save face. Ahmed Abdul Hadi, the head of Hamas's political office in Lebanon, said, "We want something in writing to ensure that negotiations continue to reach a permanent ceasefire." And Israel isn't vetoing other sides doing that, but it's not willing to agree itself to stop the war permanently. That can be overcome. But Netanyahu has recently also said that he wants to stop armed members of Hamas or armed Palestinians in general from going up over the Netzarim corridor, which separates northern Gaza from the rest of it. And he wants some sort of mechanism that will stop them from doing that. That would require bringing in international forces. That since the IDF is supposed to withdraw from the Netzarim corridor as part of the ceasefire, that could seriously delay the deal and might even torpedo it. And some people believe that Netanyahu is putting that in order to delay and torpedo the deal. And his senior Israeli negotiator told Dana Weiss of Channel 12 that demand could undermine talks. He said, quote, "The prime minister's insistence on creating a mechanism to stop armed men from moving is a red herring, which will hold up negotiations for weeks, and by then there may be no one to get back in a deal." End quote. Now, a lot of people wonder about what would happen to Gaza once a deal is made. Who will rule it? That's not in the deal. But there's been a lot of talk about that, especially David Ignatius's column about 2,500 armed PA officers who probably wouldn't be called PA because Israel doesn't want it to be called PA, who would take over. And Hamas hasn't denied that that's something that might happen. The same leader I quoted before, Hamas leader from Lebanon, said, "We do not want to rule Gaza alone in the next phase. We want to have a partnership and national consensus," end quote. And Fatah and Hamas are meeting in China later on in this month. And he said, "We hope this meeting will result in a national consensus." But he said this wouldn't be a matter decided by Israel. It's a Palestinian matter that is agreed upon by the Palestinian people. So they're going to insist on keeping that out of the deal as well. Now, some people in Israel have been overconfident because the tide has turned a little bit in the war, and they think that the same pressure that has been used to get Hamas to the table could also be used to defeat Hamas. But I have to warn that that is not true. It's much easier to put pressure on a side by destroying their network, infrastructure, members. That's not the same as defeating them. As we know, defeating Hamas would require taking over the Gaza Strip and building an alternative. Otherwise, Hamas will continue to exist in one form or another and will continue to rule. And we talked about how Hamas is willing to give up rule. To me, it seems that what they want to do there is allow Fatah to cover for them, kind of the way the Lebanese government covers for Hezbollah in Lebanon, because they've realized that being front and center and ruling Gaza places them at a disadvantage and puts them at risk in a way that being behind the government does not. So I think that that's really what they're doing. But anyway, time is still working against Israel in the macro. That's because the hostages have a limited amount of time. The longer Israel waits, the more likely they are to be dead. International opinion will turn against Israel again, especially if Israel is blamed for torpedoing the deal. So right now, it looks like Hamas is the one who's not agreeing to the framework. If it's Israel, things will change quickly. And then the ICC and the ICJ will probably judge Israel as harshly as they possibly could. And then, of course, there's a question of the north. Hezbollah keeps bombing Israel. Israel needs to put a stop to that, either by reaching a deal with Hezbollah or stopping the fighting or going to war in the north. As long as it's continuing the war in Gaza, that becomes harder to do. So there's a lot of leverage Hamas still has. Israel can't overplay this partial hand that it has. And most Israelis understand that, and they support a hostage deal. According to the Channel 12 polls, 64% of Israelis want a deal, and only 15% are against it. So vast majority of Israelis are for it, obviously the hostage families. And that's not because most Israelis don't want to defeat Hamas. It's because they believe that the current government, with its current strategy, can't defeat Hamas. And they're 100% correct. But a lot of people are doubting Netanyahu's honesty here. Something he wants to reach a deal only after he gives a speech in DC later this month. Some people believe he wants to destroy the deal altogether. Best case scenario, he is playing bad cop to the good cop of the main negotiating team. But there's so much distrust right now towards Netanyahu that a lot of people believe that he is going to be the reason this deal will not be reached. I hope it's the best case scenario where he's trying to be the bad cop and ultimately will release hostages. Let's give Netanyahu a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Netanyahu has in the past made a deal to release Shalit. He reached a deal to release hostages earlier in this war. The trouble is, he's concerned that if this deal is reached, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will leave the government, as they said they have, and we know that Netanyahu places his political survival above all. That's the concern, and the reason some people think this time will be different. Okay, haven't done a video in a while. Apologize for that. But I do have a couple of questions from back when I did the last one. FRDZ4KB asked me a very tough question. Plenty of people predicted the Israeli response would end in tears and a strategic defeat for Israel. Was that an unfair, premature assumption to make? Or did those, like you, who had a more hopeful assessment, just badly misjudge the incompetence of this government and its willingness to prioritize its political survival and interests over that of the country and hostages and displaced people? So that's a tough one. On some level, I was somewhere in between those camps. I had a lot of concerns because this government, I knew before the war was incompetent. You can see that from judicial reform, the way they handled crime, the way they handled October 7th, and all those things. But I hoped that Netanyahu would see his political redemption in winning the war, that his patriotism would win out, and that the inclusion of Gantz and Eisenkot in the coalition would also help steer it in a better direction. Hoped. That did not happen. I can't say I'm surprised and expected it to happen, but I hoped that that would happen. I will say Netanyahu disappointed me. It's not like if you had told me at the beginning of the war that he's very self-centered and all he wants to survive, I would have disagreed. It's just that the extremes that he's gone to in this war have surprised even me. And I think they've surprised a lot of the people who are against him, and have surprised a lot of the people who are for him uh, as well. So the people who are optimistic badly misjudge. But I would say a lot of the people who are optimistic still think that Netanyahu is doing something good or that he could win this war, and others would disagree with us over why this war has gone badly. They would say that Israel just needs to use more force, like a lot of people on the right do. But yeah, I think you nailed it. The amount of incompetence and self-centered cravenness of Netanyahu, the Netanyahu in leadership of this government, has surprised most people, even surprised me to some extent. Lebouf asks me, very simple question this time around. Do you think Sinwar will survive the war? Yes, I think Sinwar will survive the war. Giving up the hostages may expose him to assassination, although I'm not sure Israel knows exactly where he is right now. So, if he gives up all the hostages, then Israel will have a better chance of killing him. But the war probably won't end until all the hostages are given back. So chances are Sinwar lives to the end of this war and possibly survives for another while. Israel will definitely not let him lead a peaceful life and just die of old age. I can't imagine that. But this war, which may end any day now, or more likely in a few weeks, Sinwar is very likely to survive it. And the Israeli government, which went around saying we're about to get Sinwar's days are numbered, is really going to regret using all those those high rhetorical phrases. Sometimes it's better to talk softly and carry a big stick, and Israel has been doing the opposite throughout this war. Okay, so thanks for joining me. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media. Also, consider listening to my history podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, where my last episode was about King Solomon and his temple. I'll include links to that at the bottom of this. Thank you so much, and I will see you here next time something exciting happens.